Hi guys, my name is Raf. Welcome to the Cake Kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how I make macarons. It's something I get asked a lot about. I think it's because macarons take a lot of practice, and on the first few times that you're going to make it, you might fail. There's no easy way to say it. Just be patient. Being successful at making macarons is all about patience, practice, and technique. While I can't give you the patience that you need, I can show you the technique I follow that gives me the most consistent results. To make this recipe, you will need 2 large egg whites or 80 grams, 75 grams of caster sugar, 85 grams of icing sugar, and 95 grams of fine almond flour. If you want to color your macarons, I would suggest having gel food coloring as well. I'll list down all the other equipment that you need on the description box below. Let's start with making sure that our dry ingredients are fine enough to make good looking macarons. The almond flour that you can normally get from the supermarket is not that fine, so if you have one, we can also use a food processor to make it finer. If you don't have one, it's not really the end of the world. We can just use a sieve to filter out the large chunks of almond. I'll put in 95 grams of almond flour into a food processor. Next, I will put 85 grams of icing sugar. We're going to blitz the two together a few seconds at a time, maybe for 5 to 6 times, to make sure that we have a fine flour texture. Now I'm going to put this mixture through a sieve to make sure we're just getting the finest parts of it. I'll just whisk it again just to make sure everything's well combined. In this recipe, I will be using the French meringue, and it's very important for us to make sure that we reach the stiff peaks. We'll mix the egg whites at low speed until we see big bubbles form on the top, and that's when we can start adding the sugar. If you want perfect looking macarons, you need to start with a very stable meringue. The next thing we have to do is the macaronnage. It's just a fancy term of saying, let's fold in the dry ingredients into the meringue and make sure we get to the right consistency. I'm going to put in half of my dry ingredients into the meringue just to loosen it up a little bit. We can fold from the sides and then fold in and cut in through the center. I'm putting a few drops of pink food coloring on mine. When the batter starts to feel more deflated and more runny, I suggest checking the consistency from time to time because you don't want to overmix it. The consistency that you're looking for is something that's smooth enough that it falls off a spatula like ribbons, which will also disappear within 10 seconds. If it's your first time piping macarons, I would suggest going for a smaller metal piping tip instead of the large ones. Let's remove the air bubbles by gently massaging the batter inside the piping bag. I'm using a silicone mat on top of a baking sheet. If you don't have one at home, you can also use baking parchment. Try to use a consistent amount of pressure when you're piping. You can also use your other hand to guide your piping bag. To pipe the macarons, place your metal tip roughly half a centimeter above the baking sheet and make sure that it's on the center. We need to make sure that we're piping as evenly as possible. Evenly sized macarons will bake for about the same time in the oven, as well as it will make it easy for us to sandwich them together with the filling. The next step might make some noise, so it will be helpful to have some kitchen towel. We're now going to let this rest for about 30 to 50 minutes until a dry skin forms on top. The dry skin makes it possible for these macarons to have their tiny little cute feet. Preheat your oven for at least 20 minutes before baking. We're going to bake our macarons for 17 minutes at 150°C conventional setting. Once they're baked, we're going to let them cool completely before filling. While we're waiting for our macarons to be ready, let's start with the filling. For this you will need 150 grams of soft unsalted butter and also 300 grams of icing sugar. To flavor, we will need 1 teaspoon of vanilla and a pinch of salt. When making this buttercream, I like putting all my sugar and butter in one bowl and using a spatula to press down the sugar into the butter. Icing sugar can really be messy, so I like doing this as a first step. I then use my mixer at low speed, gradually increasing it to medium to high as I whip more air into the mixture. If your buttercream is too stiff, you can loosen it by adding half a tablespoon of milk at a time. We're going to flavor this buttercream with a teaspoon of vanilla and a pinch of salt. We'll finish this by mixing it by hand and then covering it with cling film as we wait for the macarons to be ready. Now all we have to do is pipe the filling into the macarons. Don't forget to like this video if you found it useful, and also subscribe to my channel for my future recipe and tutorial videos. 85, 95, 80, 75, 80, 75, 85, 95. Okay. To make this recipe,
2,000 years later.
80, 75, 80, 75, 85,